with Grow Group, obviously, medicinal cannabis, as we understand it, from a sort of missions and values point of view, give us some insight.
Yeah, it's pretty simple, actually. I mean, medical cannabis has been legalized in the UK since November 2018. In Canada before that, and in Germany a year before that. And our mission is pretty straightforward. We want to drive awareness and access for patients to medicinal cannabis in any which way needed. Because there are millions of people out there who would benefit from medical cannabis, but they don't know it's available. They don't know you can get on a prescription. They don't know, even if they know that you can get on a prescription, they think it's too expensive and all of that stuff. So that's what we do. And that's what we're set up. So we're set up as a normal, traditional pharmaceutical company because we obviously need to talk to doctors, to the NHS, to other healthcare systems, and to patients. So we're organized as a traditional pharmaceutical company, but instead of ibuprofen, we do medical cannabis.
And as far as the sort of I suppose the change that's happened since the legalization of it, has it been positive? Does the future look positive for that? I suppose market awareness.
Yeah. I mean, the future is, let's put it that way. When I joined Grow in 2019, in November 19, after 35 years, traditional pharmaceutical industry, we had in the whole country 80 patients.
Right.
And there were 5 doctors who were prescribing medical cannabis in the whole of the UK. Our revenue was $4,000 a month.
Wow.
Now, and that was the whole country. And we were market leader. We had 80% of the market by then. So of the 80 patients, 64 came to us. So go on. And what we do now is $1.5 million a month revenue. So if you look at patient numbers, they went up from 80 in 2019 to probably 2,000 by the end of 2020, 4,000, 5,000, 21, 10, 15, 2022, end of 23, 30,000 patients in the country. And our revenue went from $4,000 to $1.5 million a month. We're still market leader, but not with 80%, but 35% share. So, and the extrapolation is pretty straightforward. If you compare it to Canada, Germany, Australia, the UK market should land somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people using medical cannabis. You can see that is a very interesting market to be in. And it's not going to go away.
Yeah.
Because people have worked out that it works, and it does work.
Yeah.
It's a solution for patients who have been on long-term high-dose painkillers, the opioids, fentanyls, all of those things. We talk about opioid crisis in the US, but there's an opioid crisis in Europe and in the UK too. It's not limited to the US. Every month, people land up in A&E because of overdoses of opioids and all of these things. Costs the NHS fortunes, and obviously it's not good for those patients. Organ failures, you ruin your kidneys if you take it too long, all of these things. So there are a lot of serious side effects. And there is enough evidence to show that if you introduce medical cannabis to those patients, they may not necessarily have to enable to completely throw out the opioids, but you can halve the dose or anything else to a controllable level. So that's pain, but indications where you can use it are manifold. Pain is multiple. Cancer pain, back pain, people who had limb amputations, whatever, but still feel pain from that, nerve pain. So there are many, endometriosis, women's health, anything from
migraines as well.
Migraines,
yes.
Yeah, exactly. So there are so many types of pain, and you can use cannabis for all of those. But then also mental health. So people with PTSD, anxiety, sleeping disorders. And obviously those things also kind of reinforce us themselves. So if you're in pain, you generally can't sleep well. If you don't sleep well, you're more conscious and worrying and more anxious about what is happening with you and all of that stuff. So pain generally also, a lot of patients who are in chronic pain are also depressed because of that. A lot of patients who have chronic diseases like MS, epilepsy are also depressed because of those things. So if you take away one of those, even if you let people sleep better, you will have less pain 100%. Because your body is in a better condition. So they all also work with each other. So a lot of mental health, probably half of the patients is pain related, then a third are mental health related, and then the rest is neurological conditions like epilepsy, Parkinson's, those. And it works in a lot of cases.
And I think it is in this sector really important to have a mission, because the opportunity for the industry is so big. And just to perhaps amplify a couple of comments that Pierre was making, I mean, 2018 medical cannabis was allowed. And since then, I think from January 23 was the last number I saw, there was something like 90,000 prescriptions made. A tiny, tiny fraction of those were done on the NHS, by the way. The vast majority is being through private clinics. And yet, if you look at ONS data, something like 2.5 million people, 2023 ONS said they consume recreational cannabis. And there's an estimate from YouGov about 1.8 million of that 2.5 take it for medicinal reasons. And then if you look at the chronic pain in the UK, just in the UK alone, about 28 million people suffer from chronic pain. So there is a huge opportunity there, and having a mission to actually try to find ways of positioning cannabis and driving awareness that even on a very basic level, that actually you can actually get a prescription for cannabis. Very few people, I think, even understand that.
Yeah.
And even amongst those people that are long-term chronic pain sufferers. So I think there's an incredibly important, powerful mission here that Pierre and the rest of the industry are looking to drive.
How did you acquire new customers, so to speak?
Yeah, that's actually a very important question, because the fundamental issue that we have is European law does not allow pharmaceutical companies to communicate about pharmaceutical products to patients. So you can't advertise prescription medicines. You can advertise ibuprofen and whatever, stuff like that, but you can't advertise prescription medicines. In the US, it's different. You can go on TV, and if you're in the US, there's an advert for some medication every 10 minutes.
Wow.
But here you can't. So it's a weird situation where we have a legalized market, but we can't tell anybody about it, because telling somebody about it would be advertising. So I can't go out and talk about the fact that we are providing medical cannabis for patients. But we need to be very, very careful. Fortunately, and that has helped in driving that awareness, there are now around 40 cannabis clinics in the UK.
Right.
So every medical specialist is allowed to prescribe medical cannabis as long as they do it within their specialism. And what they've done is they all joined in little groups, medical cannabis clinics, because clinics can advertise. They can't advertise about products, but they can advertise about the fact that they are a medical cannabis clinic. So we help the clinics to advertise.
Right.
Part of my team is around social marketing, and we help the clinics to put together Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, social media advertising around that. What I can't do, what I would love to do, is have an advert on the tube. If you ran out of options with your pain medication, here's the medical cannabis clinic. I can't use the word cannabis.
Yeah.
I can't do it. I would love to have a bus driving. I mean, everybody, Nike can have a bus driving through London with a Nike advert on it. I can't have an advert that uses the word cannabis. So that's an issue. And we've been working with those clinics to do that. And you get to social media are strong in these things. Yeah. And a lot of people who have or are using medical cannabis, they post all about it on social media. So that's where people pick up on things.
Matt, question for you then on this. Naturally, as a senior marketeer, CMO, you go into a business like Grow Group, for example. How challenging is that role to be able to drive market awareness, customer acquisition, retention, those pieces there from your perspective?
It's quite frustrating, I think, from a marketing perspective, that there is all this large addressable market out there that actually it's very difficult to build awareness around. And maybe we can expand a little bit on some of the jobs to be done amongst those patients, because I think there's a couple of different important types of messaging that we need to find a way to get to the market.
I mean, you talk about naturally the challenges and the legislation that's associated with that. I think one of the things I'd like to touch on here is, look, the biggest challenge, I suppose, really, because the NHS have done no trials, have they? From what I understand, there's been no real sort of comprehensive trials done by the NHS despite its legalization.
Yeah, but it's not on the NHS's shoulders to do trials. If you look at this from a standard pharmaceutical perspective, pharmaceutical companies will do the trials. Then show the trials to the NHS with the evidence around it. Then the NHS will bring in NICE, Institute for Clinical Excellence. They will do a review looking at the trials, looking at the evidence, and basically determine whether spending the money on product X has an advantage over spending the money on product Y. Randomized controlled trials, which is the standard way of doing those things, compare one product with another. And most of these trials use a standard comparator just to make sure that you have one thing that you constantly compare it with. So if you would do a pain trial, you would compare whatever product you have with opioid or with ibuprofen and show that there's a benefit in using yours. Cheaper, more effective, less side effects. That's basically what you're looking at. And if you take all three, you're obviously in. With cannabis, it's a little bit more difficult because it's a plant and there are like 180 ingredients in a plant. It's not just THC and CBD, but it's like terpenes, lots of other flavonoids. And the problem with doing standard clinical trials is that it needs to be proper one-to-one. So if I have a plant with more ingredients, I need to single out the ones that I think that work and make that compare. That doesn't work with a cannabis plant, because if you would only take THC and synthesize that or extract it from a plant and compare that with ibuprofen, THC on its own works a lot less than if you do it as a plant. It also actually makes you quite unwell in higher doses.
And THC is it the psycho?
THC is the psychoactive part of it. Okay. Yes. So you got THC and CBD. CBD is the stuff that generally calms you down and has little to no medical effects, but it enhances how your THC works. So it kind of balances out a little bit. And THC is the more, if you have pain, anything else, that's where THC comes in. If you have sleeping disorders, neurological things, that's where CBD come in. So you need both. But interestingly, you also need some of the other stuff that isn't plant. So if you were to give a singled out synthesized molecule and compare that, it doesn't work. So you need to do the plant. But then, talking to Matt about it earlier, we may have the same pain problem, but his body will respond differently to the same plant as mine. So he may need a bit more THC, I need a little bit less THC, we need a bit more different terpene profiles in it. So to do a one-to-one becomes incredibly difficult. You end up having to use tens of thousands of patients who will be on different medications versus one. So to run that would cost hundreds of millions. Cannabis industry doesn't have that money to run those trials. And then you end up licensing a plant, which you can grow. Martin can grow. We can all grow a plant. So I have a patent on
I'll be honest with you, I can't grow a plant.
But theoretically.
Literally, I can't keep any plant alive. I just want to get that out of there, right? It doesn't matter whether it's a cannabis plant or a daffodil or whatever it is. Okay. I definitely can't grow plants.
So you would have an issue with patent protection in doing those things. So it becomes the other side of the equation is, as Matt was saying, there are 1.5 million people that we know in the UK only using cannabis for medicinal purposes. We know that there are hundreds of millions of people in the US and Canada using cannabis for medicinal purposes, and we know it works. So do we really need to go and do another couple 100 million clinical trials? Because the other way of looking at it, somebody will have to pay for running those clinical trials. So if we end up spending $1 billion running a clinical trial, that will in the end translate into the cost of the medicine.
Yeah.
That's a bit silly.
Yeah.
You're basically looking at the NHS is overcomplicating something where we know there is evidence, we know people are already doing it, we know it works. We can spend the next 10 years running clinical trials to show that it works, which we already know, and the end product is going to be more expensive than what we have now. So why are we overcomplicating this? But the system deals with, we only prescribe products that have a license.
Yeah.
That's where it comes in. So the bit that we need to convince doctors of is that they can prescribe, which they know, you can prescribe unlicensed products. So doctors can prescribe medicines off-label, that's what it's called. So you have an approved label, but you can also use it for that. There is a very small step from not having a label at all to prescribing it for that non-label, which is what's happening with cannabis. So it's not an unusual thing to prescribe a product that doesn't have a license for it. So that's not a problem. It's just a system where reality probably also is. If 1.5 million patients are taking cannabis for medicinal purposes, if they would land in the NHS wouldn't have the capacity to deal with those patients.
Yeah, that's true.
They wouldn't have the money to deal with those patients because those patients are now paying for it themselves. I mean, they're paying their dealer.
Would that not compensate then, jumping in there, that, if the NHS then get that revenue that is going to black market, basically?
If you would drive medical cannabis as a NHS option, obviously there will be, we've calculated what would happen if you do that. You'd probably create 100,000 jobs in the UK.
Really?
For people who are cultivating, distributing, manufacturing, all of that stuff. You would create probably a 2 billion revenue stream with tax going into the... There will be a cost, but there is a lot of offset. Plus, and that's probably what we should look at more importantly, you would help a lot of patients who are now going to their dealer, doing illegal activity by getting drugs that they can get arrested for.
Stop a lot of crime as well, I
Stop
guess.
a lot of crime. You're taking stuff that your dealer can tell you everything, what it is, where it came from.
Well, you don't know, do you?
It's
like
no
anything,
clue.
isn't it? Yeah,
exactly.
So there is no pharma grade.
There's no
element to
pharma
it, is
grade, no.
Yeah.
So you'll get controlled pharmaceutical grade product with doctor oversight in a medical setting. So there would be a lot of benefits for it. The most important thing to look at, what is it about the NHS? The NHS for many patients, what we like in the UK is that the NHS is for free. If you ever want that to happen, and knowing that the NHS works with that system where they will look at data and evidence to look at the medicines, somebody will need to start looking at generating evidence to do that. So we're doing real-world evidence programs, but your dealer is not going to collect data. So if you want that to happen, we should all support the medical cannabis industry and should all talk to doctors in the NHS that they can prescribe medical cannabis and then make sure that we collect the data. So you get that as an evidence-generating model in there. Only that way you will get it in there.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're in a bit of a chicken and egg situation. I mean, the NHS did form a cannabis registry, I think, in 2020.
Yeah.
But the challenge, of course, is the level of prescriptions is so small within the NHS that the level of data and clinical evidence that's going to collect is not really going to move the dial on any of this, unfortunately.
How much of that data can you potentially rely on to then support that legalization bit?
Well, there's two issues there. And there's probably a bigger issue that goes over the top, which I think you're alluding to, which is perhaps one of the biggest challenges in all of this, is actually overcoming the prejudice and stigma that's kind of attached to cannabis. Let's come back to that in a minute. But just on the data side, I mean, there's really 2 or 3 issues there. One is that there isn't much clinical evidence being collected in a methodical way that we just heard about. There are around 4,000 studies around the effects of cannabis. I think when you look at some of the regulatory bodies, their view of that is perhaps the data robustness, the sample size is not sufficient, perhaps, to make more substantive claims around the benefits of cannabis. So you can't really access much data. Secondly, if you could access data and extrapolate benefits, it's still very hard to do because, as Pierre was describing earlier, you're still restricted in the fact that it's a pharmaceutical prescribed medicine, and you can't go out in Europe and the UK and make definitive health claims around it. So you have to find some kind of more subtle ways of doing that. I just wanted to go, though, back to just this overarching thought here, which is we've touched on, which is really one of the main competing products to prescribed medicinal cannabis is, of course, the grey market, and the fact that you can very easily, get access to cannabis recreationally, if you like. And I think there is an important sort of positioning piece here from a marketing perspective, which is to have the drumbeat of why actually medicinal, properly prescribed cannabis is a better option for you if you are suffering from chronic pain, for example, because of the quality of the product, the fact that it complies to GMP, good manufacturing protocols and process, for example, the ability to have correct or carefully calibrated dosage, the options not just to ingest it or smoke it, because of course a lot of people don't smoke and don't want to vape or inhale it, but there are many other ways. But I think these are all benefits of properly prescribed medicinal cannabis that I think the industry as a whole can probably message a little bit more strongly, particularly perhaps through the clinic network, because I agree that if you go on Google and you search for medical cannabis, and by the way, of course, one of the issues here is that a lot of people wouldn't even search for that in the first place because they don't know it exists. But if you are already somewhat educated, you will see quite a few clinics pop up on Google search. But even if you go into some of those major clinic groups, I think, is it Life group, and Curaleaf and some of the others, they're not very consistent, some of the messaging. Yeah. So, and I think as an industry, there's probably more that could be done around there in terms of consistency of messaging, particularly the benefits of prescribed medical cannabis versus recreational use.
It should be driven by education as well, shouldn't it? I mean, at a political level as well.
Pretty powerful thought process, really, isn't it? Yeah, the education aspect. I mean, politics-wise, you're not going to get anywhere with that, are you?
Well, no is the answer. Short answer.
Until we have a change.
we can spend the rest of the day on that, but there is no political.
There's enough of that going around.
There is no political appetite.
Yes.
To drive medical cannabis, or as many people want, legalize cannabis anyway. They legalized cannabis in 2018 under pressure of a couple of parents with children with epilepsy, who obviously suffered from hundreds of seizures every day, and then with cannabis reduced that or even eliminated that. So that's the difference between your kid on the ICU and dying versus your kid at home and having a reasonably normal development. And then let's not forget, politics is driven by polling.
Yes.
So they all go out and they go, is medical cannabis going to get us, or is legalizing cannabis going to get us more votes? And it doesn't get you votes. If it doesn't get you votes, you're not going to campaign about it. So it's not in there. It's not in the on the program. So it's not going to happen before 2030. So that's where politics sit. We've legalized it. You can do it. And then there is something else that plays into that. A lot of cannabis companies, they were founded in 2018 with a lot of investment money. What happened in 2018, and we're different from that, and I'm going to explain why. They also had their own clinic, and the clinic was used as the channel for selling or prescribing their own products. So you have a nicely vertically integrated system. Everybody expected there would be a queue around the corner in 2019 when it was legalized. There was no queue, but people had invested millions in setting up those companies. So in 2019 and 2020, investors started to get a bit nervous and basically said, when am I going to get my money back? Because they expected IPOs and private equity and everybody else to
This
come
is what
in.
happened in the US.
No, this is UK.
But this was what happened in the US anyway, because there's obviously states were legalizing it.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. The market in the US and Canada, if we have time, we come back on that as a whole different story. But yes, a lot of investment money, then the markets didn't pick up. And that's very similar to the US and to Canada. So investors started to get nervous. CEOs running into boardrooms saying, I want our market share to go up. But, I mean, talked about 80 patients. That's a bit of a tallest dwarf thing. You can have the highest market share, but if the market is nothing, what's the point? But they all did investor slide decks talking about using that 1.8 million number, all talking about the UK medical cannabis market is like 3 billion by 2028. That's not going to happen. It might be a couple hundred million, but it's not going to be 3 billion. But you can see what happens if some of the people in government and the MPs, they see those slide decks and they see cannabis industry talking about the UK medical market being 3 billion in 2028. They go, you don't need our help, do you? You're doing pretty well. But what then happened is those companies started competing with each other about patient numbers. Nobody ever, and that's to Matt's point, and we talked about it, Phil, marketing is not in everybody's on everybody's list of skills.
No, it's not.
And if you can grow cannabis and if you can invest in cannabis, doesn't mean that you understand cannabis marketing or healthcare marketing, which is why I joined Grow Group. Because the conversation I had with our boss, Ben Langley, and founder, is before we start shouting about stuff, we need to pharmaceuticalize cannabis industry. Make sure that you understand and bring people in who understand how to talk to healthcare system, who understand to talk to doctors, who understand to talk to patients. Because just shouting that you have cannabis and it is legal is not really going to get you anywhere if you have all these restrictions from marketing. I want to be the Amazon of cannabis. Top portfolio, best products, from cheap to expensive, high quality, all of these things with the best possible service around it, which has worked. So we are now preferred supplier or one of two suppliers to every clinic in the country. So that's the point. Marketing and execution. A lot of people think they're marketeers, but strategic marketing and customer segmentation and all of these things is not necessarily the same as growing a cannabis plant. And if you look at many of the boards of American, Canadian cannabis companies, it's people with money, people, investors, lawyers. There are very few doctors in there, and there are very few, if any, marketeers in there. And the cannabis companies that have been successful are the one that had marketeers and thought about how do you develop a brand? How do you build a brand? How do you build a market? Those are things that you can spend a lot of time on and should spend a lot of time on, not just thinking, oh, it's now legal and it's going to work.
So whereabouts in the UK have you seen the largest growth? Is it north, south? Is there a particular region?
Funnily enough, almost everything outside London. Because it goes back to Matt's point. I mean, if you're in London and you want to get cannabis, there is a dealer on every corner.
We just
probably people in your own office, right?
there probably would be, yeah.
I was struck actually because we returned to the UK after being away for 15 years last year. One of the biggest changes I noticed was just walking the streets of London, and the smell of cannabis everywhere. Yeah.
I can't stand the smell of it. That's another.
Weirdly enough, it gives me a headache.
Yeah.
So I'm the biggest cannabis company in the UK, and I get a headache as soon as I even smell it. But the highest growth is in areas. I need to be a little bit careful if I say it like that, but with the worst coverage on the NHS.
Okay, so that makes it. That does make sense.
Northern Ireland, Scotland,
yes,
Channel Islands. It's a combination of black market prices are higher than in London.
Mm-hmm.
So the prescription product becomes more attractive for another reason. It's actually also cheaper. It's not just quality and doctor and everything else, but it's also cheaper than the black market product.
Yeah.
Accessibility is less because there's less black market opportunities.
Yeah.
and go to those areas. There are no pain clinics, or the wait list for the pain clinic is like 9 months or something like that. So people are more desperate to go and try other things. So Northern Ireland is probably the region with the highest density of medical cannabis patients in the UK.
One very interesting thing to me is that the restrictions in the NHS for prescribing this it's incredibly narrow, is my understanding.
Yes.
There's only 3 very serious areas where you can prescribe on the NHS, and it's things like epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, I think nausea, around
Chemotherapy-induced nausea, vomiting, yeah.
Whereas in private clinics, it is more broadly prescribed, including for chronic pain, as we've spoken about. And yet access is still a problem even in the private sector. I think there's about 30 clinics in the UK where you can get a medical prescription. I think it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about how, the access could be improved through private clinics. Because I don't think, Pierre, I'm right in saying there doesn't seem to be any strong move to expand the level of NHS therapeutic areas where this might be prescribed anytime soon.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that goes a little bit back to what we were talking about earlier. The NHS will traditionally only deal with licensed medicines, and Epidiolex and Sativex are the licensed medicines with that license indication. So treatment-resistant epilepsy, the pathway is there are like 8 or 9 or even more medicines that you can take. Then if none of those work, you actually get deep electric brain stimulation to stop the seizures from happening. And only after all of that fails, you can get medical cannabis.
What time frame is that over?
Well, you can talk 10 years. Theoretically, doctors in the NHS can write prescriptions for medical cannabis, even if it's private. There is actually nothing really that stops doctors on the NHS from doing those things other than stigma or lack of education, or what would my colleagues say if I do it, and all of that stuff. Even from an insurance company, a lot of doctors initially thought that from insurance liability would expose them to have a higher premium. So there is nothing that stops us from
I think this is a very interesting point, because actually, as well as addressing some of the kind of patient issues and stigma, and also the benefits and the practicalities of as a patient or a prospective patient getting access to medicinal cannabis, there's actually a very big job to do on the sort of supply side, if you like, through doctors and the clinic network. And I think Pierre's touched on a couple of really important points there, because there is actually, I think, a lack of understanding of perhaps some of the latest findings around the benefits of cannabis, particularly in chronic pain management, and particularly versus other pharmaceutical products like opioids, for example. And actually the practicalities of actually becoming a prescriber of medical cannabis. So being on the GMC specialist registrar, and what that entails, the fact that actually insurance is not actually as big an issue as perhaps some doctors may think. The fact that there is this, actually, if you're more in the private sector running a clinic and you're not yet doing medicinal prescriptions, there is a very large addressable market potentially out there as well. And providing some of the training and education that could start to expand the supply and therefore access to medical cannabis. I think there is quite an interesting organization, the Membership of Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society. They seem to be doing some quite good work in this area. I think an organization like that, which is trying to bring doctors that are already prescribing, sharing best practice, or giving advice to physicians that are thinking about becoming prescribers, those kind of organizations are really important. And I think there's a way of perhaps amplifying from Pierre's company and others, and supporting some of those organizations to try and educate the clinician base out there and expand access to prescriptions.
Yeah, MCCS are doing that's the name. They're doing a good job.
You'll get me walking down and stopping the kids in the park now and going, did you know?
I have a button. Talk to me about
Yeah,
cannabis on
yeah.
prescription.
Do you have one?
Yeah. I have. We made every staff member has one.
That's
With-
brilliant.
When I'm on the tube, I put the button on,
Really?
and I get at least one person every journey
That's amazing.
look at me and go, "Can we have a conversation?"
Is there a stereotype to that person, by the
No.
way? Really?
No.
What's the
fantastic.
button? Is it a
It's a
leaf
green
or-
button, and it
Yeah.
has this white text.
It's a badge, basically.
It's like this big, like what, 2-3 inches.
Mm.
Talk to you about medical cannabis. That's what it says. Nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there's another factor here, by the way, which is that there's another barrier, actually. I mean, unfortunately, to add to the heap of barriers and challenges, but one other barrier is that actually, even if you did know about prescription cannabis and you went to either NHS or private clinic, there's still actually a lot of hoops you have to go through because you have to have tried at least 2, I think, alternative courses before you go to an unlicensed medicine. So you have to show evidence you've actually taken a licensed pharmaceutical product or you've done another type of therapy, whether it's counselling, etc., before a doctor will prescribe you.
Practice, it's not as difficult. Matt is right. So what the clinics and the doctors in the clinics have adopted is exactly that. You should have used or considered 2 standard whatever medications before you go to cannabis. But nowhere, and I'm not trying to make this easier to get it, but it's nowhere defined what those 2 are. So it could be ibuprofen and paracetamol. It doesn't have to be fentanyl and OxyContin or something like that.
Okay.
The problem is that people, a lot of patients who would be eligible and who would like to take medical cannabis on prescription, they haven't seen a doctor for quite a while.
Yeah.
Because the fact is they're actually quite disappointed in what the doctor could do for them. So if you've been taking painkillers and none of that helped, at the end you can't really know, well, I'm not even going to try anymore because nothing what they've given me has helped. So they haven't seen a doctor for a year, 2 years, maybe even longer. And now they suddenly need to go and talk to a medical specialist. But they also are a little bit cautious about going to their practice and asking for their medical records. Because in many cases, the practice nurse is going to ask, what do you want that for?
Yeah. I have recently.
Do you have to tell them?
Yeah, the reality is you don't have to tell them. You
don't want to upset them, though, do you? Because they're
it's a very
under
British thing, isn't it?
They're under
so
enough
what
pressure as it is. But it's the same. It's funny you say that. You don't go see your doctor for the simple fact that you don't believe what they're prescribing now is having any effect, or you're not happy with the results. There's another element here where you're suffering silence a lot of the time as well.
Yeah,
I don't go because am I dying? No, that's the male mentality, I suppose, from that point of view. And also, I don't want to heap the pressure on them because they're burdened enough as it is.
It's also waiting times.
Well, you can't get an appointment,
exactly.
can you?
You can't get an appointment.
I want to, totally sort of switch gears a little bit here and move into, the R&D aspect of it and the fascinating world of how technology is playing a part in this.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's 2 parts to research and development. One is around looking into symptoms or diseases where medical cannabis works best or better, or what THC CBD ratios or what terpene profiles or whatever do work better versus others. So you can look into that, and companies do that. The other bit is making different new modes of administration of medical cannabis that will help. So why do I say that? So 95% of medical cannabis at the moment globally is prescribed as cannabis flower. That's not necessarily the smartest way of taking it. Apart from the fact that you need to vaporize it, you're not allowed to smoke it. You need to vaporize it. Not everybody can inhale things. The other thing with inhaling is it works almost immediately, but it also drops off quite quickly. So if you have an acute thing, inhaling your medication is very handy. But an hour later or 2 hours later, it'll stop working.
Yeah.
If you have chronic pain, that actually doesn't make sense.
No.
If you have chronic pain, what you would like to take a tablet or have something else that has a longer effect. But most importantly, you would like to take something that works longer, has the same effect, lasts longer, So what we do, I spend a lot of time on in R&D, is capsules, tablets. We're working on patches or plasters with a controlled release. So as an example, we've seen patches for pain that work a lot better and a lot longer, and it also for a doctors, and doctors are very traditional. Prescribing a patch or prescribing a tablet feels a lot closer and a lot more comfortable than prescribing 30 grams of flour. You're like,
in a bag.
Well, that was gonna be a question there for you,
exactly
Mark.
that.
Is it easier to in a clear bag as well? The White Widow super cheese.
Oh, exactly that. Yeah.
Is it? Does the vehicle dictate a power of marketing?
I think it does, because we spoke a little bit earlier about. I mean, this comes back to the patient. You know, who is the patient? Why are they taking it?
I like that.
How do they like to take it? I mean, the patient, always comes first. But coming back to your point, I think the method of dosage and taking it is really important, because I can absolutely get that a doctor will be much more comfortable if it sort of doesn't have the connotation of cannabis. And actually, it's the same for a segment of the patient population. There are some that are very comfortable and perhaps would prefer bud. There are going to be quite a few that actually don't want to go have that stigma, the smell, the way of taking it. And actually, they want something that feels more like a medicine. So it is really important for me.
The other part of it is that it's you can also patent that mode of administration.
That's fascinating. I mean, as a marketer, I'm instantly pricking up my ears here, because
change the game.
It's differentiated. It's the method of delivery is novel. For a lot of patients, it's a great way of taking it. And one of the big challenges of medical cannabis is actually differentiation and distinguishing it against street and recreational use. And this would be a great, fantastic, powerful way of doing that. Medical adherence is a factor that affects all pharma products to less or a greater degree. And sometimes completion rates can be quite small. Lasting the course, taking the course correctly, taking the right dosage at the right time, etc. So there might be thinking a little bit more about Pierre's patch and administration is, companion apps. Is there a role for technology to have a companion app that goes along with this that could help people take, especially their chronic pain sufferers, keep them on track, give them healthy advice, perhaps broaden the topics around chronic pain management, etc.
Yeah, it's a very relevant question. The answer is we just haven't worked it out yet. We're on our way, and I'll explain why. So there have been a lot of apps. I mean, over the last 10 years, and when I was in pharma, everybody suddenly had an app. That's nice for a week or two. After that, you work it out. I mean, I need to inject myself every Saturday. That's what I picked. I don't really need an app to do it, because if I don't, I feel it. There's a limited, if you approach it from that perspective, it has a very limited effect. We've developed an app. What becomes much more interesting is if you look at for like the patch. One of the patches that we're developing is actually controlled through the app. So you control the app, and then the app tells the patch how much active ingredient to release. And the app doesn't know, the patch doesn't know that if you don't tell it. What we're also doing is all of the clinics, including the ones that we work with, they're now developing apps as the clinic. So if you want to book in your appointment, or if you want to book in your repeat prescription, you do it through the app. Those things work. And one of the things I've been thinking about also in the run up to this conversation, what we could probably do is develop an AI model that would look into patient genetics, patient disease, patient medication, whether it works or not works, and then do a predictive self-learning model about who would respond better or worse to medical cannabis. And it does actually help.
I bet it does. Yeah.
So doing stuff like that would be an interesting.
Can you, and again, that then potentially, does that help from a marketing point of view? Because that's one of the biggest barriers here for growth and market entry for you. If you've got something like that, do you then, market through that? So
well, you can see how it happens. Let's say Matt develops that.
Yeah.
And then
you acquire.
Everybody goes and interviews Matt about why he developed that. So Matt can explain why the word cannabis is going to come up.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously somebody's then going to say, oh yeah, cannabis is legal for prescription in the UK, isn't it? So it'll drive those things. At the end of this month, we're launching a specific product for women's health. A lot of women there are many women with endometriosis, period pain, menopausal pain, you name it. There's a Canadian company who, as a wellness brand, designed a cannabis product, which has a bit more CBD than THC, but they're both in there. And they just designed it pretty elegant, a nice vape pen, and we're going to launch that in the UK specifically for that audience.
Yeah, I think just to pick this up, this is a very good point, which is there are ways of, I think a lot of this comes back to content creation.
Yeah.
And in this example, it's perfect because there's content, there's also a brand and a very clearly defined audience that goes with it. But finding those, there's sort of newsworthy, interesting angles that are kind of oblique to the things we would like to talk about, really, which is the kind of the benefits of cannabis, but actually finding ways to go around the restrictions and finding those opportunities, whether that's through PR, press, podcasts, videocasts like this, content generation online, SEO. There are ways of getting some of the higher level messaging out there, particularly this point around just the basic fact that actually you can get cannabis prescribed to you in the UK.
That's the one thing that we just need to get
if you were going to take away 1 point today, I suppose, or get across one message, would that be it?
Find ways to increase awareness. Yeah. We are now working with a guy called Big Nasty. I'm not sure if you know him. And he is a cannabis patient.
Okay.
He has a prescription. He goes to one of the clinics that we work with. But he also knows a lot about, because he's been using cannabis for his conditions for quite a long time. So he knows a lot about it. So Big Nasty was like, I know a lot about cannabis. My team know a lot about cannabis. I'm going to use that and work with a cannabis company to find the best possible products, put them in the market under his brand, and use the huge network that he has on increasing that awareness. So he founded Big Nasty Medical and works with us to import the product, package it, or whatever. So they just launched their first product, and he did a very brief Instagram post announcing, basically said, medical cannabis is never going to be the same again. For all those reasons, he brought and his team, they are incredibly knowledgeable about all of that. So we worked with them in finding a couple of really good products. And he did a very small post, and like in 24 hours, 4,000 people went to their website. Where can I do this? How can I do that? Because it appeals to all those people who are out there who are using medical cannabis. So it's a small example, but a very effective example of how.
It's a good one. I mean, in the US, not so much medical cannabis, perhaps more the recreational dispensary side. There's been quite a lot of collabs with Sean Paul and
Ric Flair
placement within
Ric Flair.
Ric Flair drip. Yeah, so Ric Flair, you know Ric Flair, right? Everyone knows Ric Flair. Ric Flair, famous
the wrestler. He's a wrestler.
Okay,
the American wrestler. Yeah.
He
won the Royal Rumble once by being first in the
aware.
ring or second in the ring, and then
But
lost out.
he's
That's my childhood memories.
highly well-known figure in the US,
Yeah.
and I mean he's 18. He's got Ric Flair drip, and it's just everywhere. It's literally everywhere. Mike Tyson's got his own brand as well, hasn't he? Yeah, I mean the what they're doing over there is amazing.
Is there a danger to that though?
Yes,
Because then you've got I mean, Mike Tyson is, we know him as a phenomenal sportsman, boxer, etc. But there's a stigma associated with him.
Well, I was going to pick up on this point actually, because I think sort of Pierre's kind of covered this already, because we talked earlier a little bit about overcoming certain cultural associations, with cannabis and so on. But this is sort of where you need, and it's back to the patient.
Yeah.
Who's taking it? Who could take it? What demographic? What are they interested in? But having that multi-strand, it's classic marketing, multi-strand approach where, some people are going to be very drawn to Big Nasty, but then you've got, the interior designer example with a women's health, completely different type of demographic. And that's really what you need to do. And I think influencer marketing, we spoke earlier about the restrictions on paid digital, which are pretty ironclad, to be honest. There's a little bit more grey area with X/Twitter. But actually influencer marketing for this is, I think, one of the levers to pull. I think, again, you have to be very careful with the way that you position the product, talk about the product. And you also need to make sure that you also do it in such a way that the influencer themselves wants to appear authentic, but also does not break any rules and does not get them barred from platforms as well. But actually that audience segmentation piece, working out your messaging and how do you deliver that with influencers as one channel, I think is a very important part of this.
It's a fascinating. I have a list of 25 celebrities who are taking cannabis on prescription. The one thing that they don't want is they don't want to come out and talk about the fact that they're using medical cannabis because it might damage their career. Because there are obviously countries where medical cannabis is not allowed. What you see is towards the end of their career, they suddenly become more comfortable with doing that. So ex-rugby players instead of active rugby players and all of these things. So that's what we're looking at. But it influencer marketing. What I hope, this is kind of wild. There are 10 million women in the UK. People have known the numbers that suffer from endometriosis or menopausal pain or period pain or anything else. I just need one or two to come out, and a doctor who is interested in the topic sit on the breakfast TV and talk about how big the issue actually is. Because if you talk about endometriosis, do we really appreciate how many? You talked about 28 million people suffering chronic pain. That's a lot. That's like more than a third of the population of the country. And I'm not saying cannabis is always the solution, but number of people that would benefit from an alternative to what they are doing now is massive.
You said 2030 earlier as a date. You said nothing's really going to happen. Do you see it? Is that how long you think it will be, or do you think it will be longer than that until you see significant change?
Do I think the NHS will ever prescribe medical cannabis flower? Buds? Probably not. But once we get into capsules and tablets and patches and everything else, you'll lower that threshold. The other thing that will play into it is a lot more doctors by then will be educated about it.
Yes,
because we do a lot of work around that. With more patients, we can bring prices down because it's a very simple. I mean, I have to fly the product in from all over the place and do lots of complicated things to get here. Once your patient numbers go up, your prices go down, so it becomes more accessible on that side. Education improves. There will be a number. I don't know what that number is, but there will be a number where it suddenly becomes a lot easier to do it on the NHS. The simplest move would be to open the registry up to unlicensed products. That's switch like that. There's nobody needs to do anything. That's not a politics or whatever decision. That's just somebody
who makes that decision. Who is
somebody in NHS? What is his name? Who runs the director of the NHS?
Okay, so that is just that.
It's a simple decision like that. Just open the registry.
Do you cold call him and let's do some BD
every day?
It's business development 101, isn't it?
Something like that. There is the worry that we all talk about the NHS and the NHS being overrun and stretched and everything else. So they are desperately trying to manage resources.
I think Matt said it, didn't he? The chicken and the egg scenario.
Yeah.
If you get it in, it's more money, more staffing potentially. But I think there's a
Sometimes
There's a
people are
deeper issue
afraid
with
of
that,
being
though.
the first to say it,
Of
aren't
course
they? And the
there
first
is.
to go. People are waiting. Everyone wants to be innovative, but they never want to be the first. You know,
Yeah,
they never
absolutely.
want to. It takes balls. There's also, I guess, the generational stigma, isn't
Yes.
there? You know,
Yeah.
as like my son is like, well, I spoke to him now and again, and my mother
still do.
gave me a backhand basically. Whereas my brother, who's he's 16, 17 years younger, he's 25 now. He smokes it, and and she has no problem with it now. But that's because he's been telling her this is the benefits of it, and it's him that's driving it and educating my parents. And I think that will start to feed through as that generation moves forward into critical roles.
Yeah, I think we're already definitely seeing that. Actually, I think CBD in a way is sort of helping that.
Yeah,
It's got cannabis into a conversation
Yeah.
with people that never would have spoken about it before, even though there's a huge amount of confusion, I think, around CBD versus THC and so on. But I think I would say that is helpful in starting to open up the conversation, get a bit more awareness going.
It's a very interesting point. So, you know, when you meet people and they don't know what you do, you meet at a party and they go, "What do you do?" And I go, "I'm medical cannabis." They go, "Oh, CBD."
Have you got it?
and then I spent the next hour explaining that CBD is very different from medical cannabis. But
That happened for the first 5 parties. Now everyone avoids you.
yeah. Now I just say that I'm the biggest legal drug dealer in the country. It's all different. But no, it is a. So you're right. CBD has opened up the conversation in many ways, but it also confused the hell out of a lot of people because when you look at the CBD marketing and advertising around it, they can't make medical claims, but they promise things. And there's influencer marketing around it and all that. So a lot of people not understanding the difference think that CBD is medical cannabis. So you've tried it, you bought it in a supermarket, it didn't work, that's the end of it.
The challenge is that you can't, as a marketeer, reach for your normal toolbox of stuff that you might have been doing for the last 20 years or whatever.
No.
You can't go for the paid digital media platforms, for example. But I think we touched on some of this already. It requires a slightly different way of thinking. Absolutely rock solid on the regulatory aspects of what you can and cannot do. But there are still some creative ways that you can segment the audience, think about some of the new product types at Pierre's and the ways of administrating it as well that go along with that, and think about how to get your message out through influencer, content, SEO, PR. There are ways of doing this.
No.
And I think this partner marketing piece, whether that's through the clinics or CBD manufacturers, etc., that's got an important role to play in this as well.
Is it refreshing, Matt? Coming back to, you've relied on certain tools that, let's be honest, have potentially, and look, you can slap me across the back of the head for this one, have made it easier for marketeers in some ways. Is it refreshing to actually think about this as, hey, this is a challenge now where I have to go back to the raw core skills, attributes that you associate with a marketeer?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there's more of an intellectual, how do we really do this? There's quite a tight set of parameters around this, but actually that makes it interesting and challenging. The other really big motivator, though, from a marketing perspective, I think, is just the fire you get from understanding the addressable market, the size of the opportunity, not just from a commercial perspective and the profit motive, but actually from the perspective and mission to really help people who are suffering from some pretty horrible things, right? Chronic long-term pain, that's a terrible thing to suffer from. And this product has got a really important role to play in that. So I think that's very motivating to really think hard about how do you kind of crack this as a marketing challenge.
So we can definitely get smarter in doing this. That's an interesting challenge.